September 20th, 1965. The South China Sea stretches endlessly beneath a cloudless sky, its waters reflecting the intense morning sun like polished steel, creating a glare so bright that even through his tinted visor, Captain Philip Smith has to squint against its brilliance. At 45,000 feet above sea level, where the air pressure is barely 1/10 of what it is at ground level, and the temperature hovers at 60 degrees below zero, Smith grips the control stick of his F-104 Starfighter with his right hand, while his left rests slightly on the throttle quadrant. The most advanced interceptor in the United States Air Force arsenal, this particular aircraft, tail number 56-869, has been his assigned bird for the past 3 months, and he knows every quirk, every vibration, every sound it makes. The aircraft cuts through the thin atmosphere at near supersonic speed. The sleek fuselage painted in a subtle gray scheme designed to make visual detection difficult against the sky, leaving a contrail that marks his presence like chalk on a blackboard stretching for miles behind him in the crystalline air at this altitude. Smith's mission is simple in theory, dangerously complex in execution. Conduct electronic reconnaissance along the Chinese coastline near Hainan Island, gathering signals intelligence on radar installations, military communications, and defensive positions. The massive and ALQ-71 electronic surveillance pod mounted beneath the centerline of his Starfighter is recording everything, every electromagnetic emission, every radar pulse, every radio transmission that emanates from the island below. This data will be analyzed by teams of specialists at the National Security Agency, building a comprehensive picture of Chinese defensive capabilities, their radar frequencies, their communication protocols, their response times to potential threats. Intelligence that could prove vital if tensions in Southeast Asia continue to escalate, if the growing American involvement in Vietnam draws China more directly into the conflict. But in the volatile theater of the Cold War, where proxy wars simmer across 3 continents and the threat of nuclear confrontation looms over every crisis, nothing is ever truly simple. Every reconnaissance mission walks a tightrope between gathering vital intelligence and triggering an international incident that could spiral into
something far more dangerous.
CTA. If you're fascinated by the hidden stories of Cold War aviation and the technological race between superpowers, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible historical accounts that shaped our modern world. Smith has been flying reconnaissance missions for 8 months. Each sortie, a delicate dance along the edge of international airspace. A chess game played at supersonic speeds, where one wrong move could mean capture, death, or worse, an international crisis that could drag to nuclear-armed nations closer to war. At 32 years old, Smith is considered one of the Air Force's premier reconnaissance pilots, selected for this assignment after demonstrating exceptional skill during his previous tour of flying tactical fighters in Europe. His personnel file shows 2,000 combat hours, 500 hours in the F-104, and a reputation for maintaining ice-cold composure in situations that would crack lesser pilots. He grew up in Nebraska, the son of a World War II bomber pilot who survived 30 missions over Germany and instilled in his son both a love of flying and a deep respect for the weight of responsibility that comes with military service. The F-104 Starfighter is a pilot's dream and nightmare combined, a sleek missile with wings so thin they could slice through paper, their leading edges sharpened to a profile measuring only 1/1600ths of an inch at the tip. Lockheed's legendary designer, Kelly Johnson, conceived it in the early 1950s as a pure interceptor, a radical departure from the increasingly large and complex fighters being developed at the time. Johnson's philosophy was simple: build the smallest, lightest airframe possible around the most powerful engine available, creating an aircraft that could climb to incredible altitudes and reach speeds that would leave any adversary far behind. The result was extraordinary. The F-104 can climb to 70,000 feet, well above the operating ceiling of virtually every fighter in the world, and reach speeds of Mach 2.2, over 1,400 miles per hour, faster than a rifle bullet at close range. The General Electric J-79 turbojet engine, the same power plant that propels the Navy's F-4 Phantom, produces 15,600 pounds of thrust and afterburner, an enormous amount of power for an aircraft that weighs barely 14,000 pounds fully loaded. But that phenomenal performance comes at a price. Multiple prices, actually, that have earned the F-104 a controversial reputation among pilots. The wings span barely 22 feet from tip to tip, giving the aircraft a wing loading so high that its glide ratio is worse than a brick dropping from a building. Pilots joke with a mixture of pride and genuine concern that the F-104 doesn't fly so much as penetrate the air, forcing its way through by sheer thrust alone. That if the engine quits, you don't glide to a landing field. You simply select a suitable crash site and try to arrive at it in a controlled manner. The landing speed approaches 200 miles per hour, requiring exceptional pilot skill and perfect timing. The ejection seat, while reliable, demands precise procedures because ejecting at the wrong angle or altitude can result in the pilot striking the vertical tail fin, an outcome that has killed more than one starfighter pilot over the years. Despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, Smith loves flying the F-104. It demands absolute attention, total commitment, perfect technique. There's no room for sloppiness, no forgiveness for mistakes, no autopilot to handle the difficult parts. It's pure flying, the most direct connection between pilot intent and aircraft response that Smith has ever experienced. When everything comes together, when the aircraft is trimmed perfectly, and the engine is singing its particular song and the thin air flows smoothly over those razor wings, the F-104 feels less like a machine and more like an extension of his own body, responding to his thoughts as much as to his control inputs. Today's mission profile keeps Smith at the outer edge of the 12-mile territorial limit claimed by the People's Republic of China, a boundary that the United States does not recognize, but respects operationally to avoid unnecessary provocation. His flight plan, carefully crafted by intelligence officers at Pacific Air Force's headquarters and approved at the Pentagon level, traces a route parallel to the Hainan coastline, maintaining a distance of 15 to 18 miles from the nearest point of land. This keeps him well clear of any legitimate territorial claim, while allowing his surveillance equipment to capture valuable signals from Chinese military installations. His radar warning receiver remains silent for now, showing no indication of tracking radars or hostile activity, though he knows that multiple Chinese radar sites are certainly painting his aircraft, tracking every mile of his progress along their coast. The massive electronic surveillance pod mounted beneath the fuselage, weighing nearly 800 pounds and extending almost 10 feet in length, records everything, capturing every radar pulse across a broad spectrum of frequencies, every radio transmission from military and civilian sources, every electronic signature from the installations on Hainan Island below, and from the naval vessels that occasionally patrol these waters. The technology packed into that pod represents some of the most sophisticated electronic warfare equipment in the American inventory. Vacuum tubes and early solid-state components configured to detect, identify, and record electromagnetic emissions across dozens of frequency bands simultaneously. Intelligence analysts back at Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, working in climate-controlled rooms filled with specialized equipment, will spend weeks processing this data, building a comprehensive picture of Chinese defensive capabilities, identifying radar types, mapping their locations, measuring their performance characteristics, looking for gaps in coverage that could be exploited if operations in this region ever turn hot. The J-79 turbojet engine behind Smith produces a steady roar modulated by the thin air at this altitude into a particular pitch that experienced F-104 pilots can use to judge engine performance by sound alone. 15,000 pounds of thrust channeled through a carefully designed nozzle pushes the Starfighter through the sky at precisely 612 knots indicated airspeed, which translates to nearly Mach 1.6 at this altitude and temperature. He checks his instruments with practiced efficiency, his eyes sweeping across the panel in a pattern drilled into him through hundreds of hours of flight training. Fuel consumption remains within normal parameters, the gauges showing 62% remaining, allowing him another 23 minutes on station before he'll need to turn back toward Okinawa. The cockpit temperature hovers at 85 degrees Fahrenheit, despite the minus 60-degree air, just inches away on the other side of the canopy, maintained by a complex environmental system that bleeds hot air from the engine compressor section. The bubble canopy, constructed from thick acrylic designed to withstand bird strikes at high speed, offers a panoramic view of the world below. Remarkably clear despite the curvature of the material and the glare from the intense sunlight at this altitude. To the west, clearly visible in the morning light, the green mountains of Hainan Island rise from the sea like ancient sentinels, their peaks reaching nearly 6,000 feet above sea level, wreathed in wisps of cloud that look like delicate brushstrokes. From this height, Smith can make out the coastline, beaches giving way to dense tropical vegetation, and here and there, the geometric patterns of human development, the straight lines of airfield runways, the clusters of buildings that mark military installations. To the east, the vast Pacific stretches to the horizon and beyond. Its surface broken by the occasional whitecap, a seemingly infinite expanse of blue that has swallowed countless aircraft and ships over the decades of conflict that have swept across this region. Smith's radio crackles with routine traffic from the radar picket destroyer USS Maddox. DD-2731, positioned 50 miles to the southeast at the designated station it has maintained for the past 3 days. The Sumner-class destroyer serves as his lifeline during these missions. It's powerful and SPS-40 air search radar capable of tracking aircraft out to 200 miles. Its radio room manned around the clock by operators ready to coordinate rescue operations if something goes wrong. The ship's Combat Information Center maintains a plot of Smith's position updated every 30 seconds, tracking his progress along the reconnaissance route while simultaneously monitoring Chinese air activity from bases along the coast. In this region, where tensions between the United States and China simmer just below the boiling point, simmering hotter with every passing month as American involvement in Vietnam deepens, every precaution matters. Every safety measure could mean the difference between a routine mission and a crisis that reaches the Oval Office. The radar warning receiver suddenly erupts with a warbling tone, sound that every fighter pilot has been trained to recognize instantly that triggers an immediate physiological response. Adrenaline flooding into the bloodstream even before conscious thought processes what's happening. Smith's eyes snap to the threat display panel. A sophisticated array of lights and indicators that translate electromagnetic signals into tactical information. Multiple tracking radars have illuminated his aircraft, their beams reaching up from installations on Hainan. Powerful transmitters painting his F-104 with radio energy that bounces back to receiving antennas, allowing Chinese operators to plot his position, altitude, heading, and speed with remarkable accuracy. This isn't unusual, not cause for immediate alarm. The Chinese track every reconnaissance flight that approaches their coast, mapping their courses, timing their patterns, building their own intelligence picture of American operations. It's part of the game, the endless chess match of the Cold War, where both sides probe, test, measure, and record, gathering information that might prove crucial if the Cold War ever turns hot. Smith maintains his course, steady and level, demonstrating through his actions that he remains well outside territorial waters, that his presence here is legal under international law, that he poses no immediate threat to Chinese sovereignty. Then the warning receiver changes tone, becoming more insistent. The warble shifting to a higher pitch, a faster pulse rate, indicating a different type of radar has locked onto his aircraft. A fire control radar, the type used to guide surface-to-air missiles toward their targets or to direct fighter interceptions with precision. This is different, more serious, crossing a line from routine surveillance to active threat. Smith's heart rate increases. He can feel it, the thump, thump, thump in his chest, accelerating. But his training takes over, years of practice and simulated emergencies, translating into smooth, controlled responses. He begins a gentle turn to the southeast, away from Chinese airspace, a deliberate movement that maintains his altitude and speed while changing his vector to put more distance between himself and Hainan Island. The electronic surveillance pod continues recording, now capturing valuable data on Chinese fire control systems. Information that could help American electronic warfare specialists develop countermeasures, identify vulnerabilities, understand Chinese tactical doctrine. The radio crackles again, this time with an urgent transmission from the Maddox. The normally calm voice of the Combat Information Center watch officer, carrying an edge of tension that makes Smith's grip on the control stick tighten involuntarily. Sword 7. Sword 7. Be advised, we have radar contacts climbing rapidly from Hainan Airfield. 2 contacts, possibly 3, bearing 270 from your position. Range 40 miles and closing fast. Estimate altitude passage through 30,000 feet. Rate of climb exceeds 10,000 feet per minute. Stand by for updates. Smith acknowledges the transmission with professional brevity, keeping his voice steady despite the surge of concern he feels. His mind already racing through calculations and possibilities. 40 miles at his current speed of 612 knots. If he maintains his present course and the interceptors are flying at comparable velocity, That gives him perhaps 4 minutes until they arrive in visual range, maybe less if the Chinese fighters are pushing maximum performance, burning fuel at prodigious rates to achieve the highest possible closure rate. The standard procedure drilled into him during countless briefings calls for him to maintain his current heading, demonstrating peaceful intent while remaining in international airspace, showing through his actions that he has no hostile intentions, that he is conducting legal transit in accordance with international law. American reconnaissance aircraft have encountered Chinese interceptors before, dozens of times over the past several years. Usually older MiG-17 Frescos or MiG-19 Farmers, subsonic or barely supersonic fighters that lack the performance to seriously threaten an F-104 at high altitude. They can barely reach 40,000 feet even in optimal conditions, certainly not while carrying a full weapons load. But something feels different about this intercept. Something in the radar data that the Maddox is reporting doesn't match the expected profile of those older Chinese fighters. The radar warning receiver shows the interceptors climbing at an impossible rate, far exceeding the performance characteristics of the MiG-17 with its centrifugal flow engine producing barely 7,000 pounds of thrust, or even the MiG-19 with its twin engines totaling just under 10,000 pounds combined. Something is climbing through 35,000 feet right now, accelerating rapidly, closing the distance with a performance margin that sends warning signals through Smith's situational awareness. He pushes the throttle forward smoothly, feeling the immediate response as the J-79 engine spools up, the turbine temperature rising, fuel flow increasing, thrust building. The F-104 accelerates smoothly through Mach 1.8. The altimeter remaining rocks steady at 45,000 feet, an altitude that should be beyond the reach of most interceptors. That represents a sanctuary of sorts where only the most capable aircraft can operate effectively. The Maddox updates his position with another transmission, the urgency more evident now in the radio operator's voice. Sword 7. Contacts now 30 miles, passing through 40,000 feet. Still climbing, still accelerating. They're coming up fast, much faster than anything we've seen before in this area. Current trajectory projects intercept with your position in approximately 90 seconds. Recommend you consider immediate evasive action. 90 seconds. Less than 2 minutes before whatever is climbing up from Hainan Island reaches his altitude and position. Smith's training as a fighter pilot, the instincts honed through years of air combat maneuvering training and countless hours in the cockpit, wars with his orders as a reconnaissance aviator, the strict rules of engagement that govern these missions. Every fiber of his being screams at him to light the afterburner and run, to push the F-104 to its absolute maximum performance, to reach for that Mach 2 capability and leave whatever's chasing him far behind in his wake, turned into a dwindling speck in his rearview mirror. The afterburner would add another 4,000 pounds of thrust, would push him through the transonic region and into the realm where the F-104 truly excels, where its needle-like design cuts through the air with minimal resistance. But his orders are crystal clear, hammered into him during pre-mission briefings, reinforced by senior officers who understand the political implications of every action in this contested airspace. Avoid provocative actions, maintain professional conduct, gather intelligence on any interceptors that approach, demonstrate that American forces operate with restraint and respect for international norms. Even while asserting their rights under international law, he cranes his neck, fighting against the G-forces and the restrictions of his pressure suit and harness, looking back over his left shoulder through the narrow canopy framing.
Oh.
The morning sun hangs low on the horizon, creating a blinding glare that makes visual acquisition difficult, forcing him to squint against the brilliant light even through his tinted visor, his eyes watering slightly from the strain. Then he spots them, 2 silver specks climbing rapidly through 43,000 feet. Contrails streaming behind them like white ribbons painted across the deep blue sky, growing visibly larger with each passing second. They're closing the distance with frightening speed, already much closer than the radar estimates suggested, either because they've accelerated even further or because the Maddox's radar lost track of them briefly in the clutter of the radar environment near the coast. The geometry of the intercept is textbook perfect. Chinese fighters positioned to arrive at his 6 o'clock position, the classic attack vector that every fighter pilot trains to achieve and to defend against. Smith's breath catches in his throat. a moment of genuine shock breaking through his professional composure as the interceptors resolve into clear, distinct shapes that he can identify with certainty. These aren't the stubby subsonic MiG-17 frescoes that he's seen in intelligence photos. They're fat fuselages and short wings, making them look almost comically outdated compared to modern fighters. These aren't even the swept-wing MiG-19 farmers. Supersonic, but barely so. Already obsolescent when compared to the latest American fighters. These are something entirely different, entirely more dangerous. Sleek, delta-winged fighters with pointed noses like needles. Massive air intakes mounted on the fuselage sides just aft of the cockpit. Clearly designed for high-speed, high-altitude operations. Even at this distance, even through the distortion of heat waves and atmospheric effects, Smith recognizes the distinctive configuration from classified intelligence briefings he attended just 3 months ago. MiG-21 fishbeds, the Soviet Union's most advanced interceptor, supposedly restricted to Warsaw Pact nations and the Soviet Union itself. Aircraft that represent the cutting edge of Soviet aeronautical engineering. The lead fighter closes to within 2 miles, and Smith can see details now. The red star markings clearly visible on the fuselage, the canopy glinting in the sunlight. The weapon's pylons under the wings carrying what look like air-to-air missiles. The radio crackles with a transmission in heavily accented but clearly understandable English. The voice professional and calm, carrying the confidence of a pilot who knows he holds the tactical advantage. American aircraft, American aircraft. This is People's Liberation Army Air Force Interceptor. You have violated Chinese airspace. You will follow us to Lingshui Airfield on Hainan Island immediately, or we will shoot you down. This is your only warning. Acknowledge immediately. Smith's mind races through the situation, analyzing multiple factors simultaneously with the rapid processing that comes from years of tactical training. His navigation instruments, the inertial navigation system that has been tracking his position with remarkable accuracy throughout the flight, confirm beyond any doubt that he remains well outside the 12-mile territorial limit. Currently positioned approximately 16 miles from the nearest point of Chinese territory, his flight recorder is capturing everything, providing evidence that will prove his position if this incident escalates into a diplomatic confrontation. But the interceptor pilots either don't care about the actual facts, operating under different orders that define a much larger zone of control, or they're deliberately manufacturing a pretext, using a false accusation to justify aggressive action. The lead fighter pulls alongside, barely 1,000 feet away. Close enough that Smith can see the pilot's helmeted head turned toward him, can make out details of the aircraft's construction. The rivets in the aluminum skin, the weathering on the paint, the Cyrillic stenciling near the access panels that confirms these are Soviet-built aircraft, recently delivered to China. This is Smith's first clear close-up look at a MiG-21, and even in this tense situation, part of his mind automatically catalogs details for the intelligence debrief that will inevitably follow if he makes it back to base. The aircraft is smaller than he expected, more compact than the F-104 with a shorter fuselage, but similar overall configuration emphasizing speed and rate of climb over range or payload. The Delta Wing, a distinctive triangular platform that extends from just behind the cockpit all the way to the tail, provides excellent high-speed characteristics and allows the aircraft to operate effectively at extreme altitudes. The nose cone housing the radar system is sharply pointed, and Smith can see the pitot tube extending forward from the tip, measuring airspeed in the same way the F-104 system does. The air intakes, a massive opening on each side of the fuselage, feed the Tumansky R-11 turbojet engine, a power plant capable of producing 12,600 pounds of thrust with afterburner, enough to push the MiG-21 two-speeds exceeding Mach 2 and altitudes approaching 60,000 feet. But it's not just the aircraft that impresses Smith, it's the professionalism of the pilot flying it. The MiG-21 holds position with rock-steady precision, maintaining exact formation despite the buffeting from the F-104's wake turbulence, demonstrating a level of skill that matches or exceeds what Smith would expect from experienced American fighter pilots. This isn't some barely trained third-world pilot struggling with an unfamiliar aircraft. This is someone who has logged serious hours in type, who has benefited from excellent training, who knows exactly what his aircraft can do and is confident in his ability to enforce his government's will. The intelligence reports that Smith reviewed before this mission suggested the possibility that China might acquire MiG-21s from the Soviet Union. But those reports were tentative, based on fragmentary evidence and unconfirmed sources. The working assumption among American planners was that even if China did receive MiG-21s, it would be a limited number that Chinese pilots would require extensive training before achieving operational proficiency. Yet here in the skies over the South China Sea, the reality directly contradicts those assumptions. Not only does China have MiG-21s, but they're operating them with confidence and skill, positioned at a forward base on Hainan Island, where they can control the approaches to the Chinese mainland and project power across a vast area of the South China Sea. Smith keys his radio, keeping his voice calm and professional, conveying through his tone that he will not be intimidated, that he represents a nation that does not back down from illegitimate threats. Chinese fighter. This is United States Air Force Reconnaissance Flight Sword. 7. I am in international airspace conducting legal transit in accordance with international law and the freedom of navigation principles recognized by civilized nations. My position is 16 miles east of Chinese territorial waters. I will not deviate from my course. Repeat, I am in international airspace and will not comply with your illegal demands. The MiG-21 pilot doesn't respond verbally to Smith's transmission. Instead, in a move clearly designed to intimidate and demonstrate both his aircraft's capabilities and his own skill, he pulls ahead of the F-104 with a burst of throttle, accelerating to put 1,000 feet of separation between the two aircraft. Then executes a sharp barrel roll, a complete rotation around his flight axis that takes him through a corkscrew path in the sky. The maneuver is perfectly executed, maintaining forward speed and altitude throughout, emerging from the roll at exactly the same position relative to Smith's flight path. It's a clear demonstration of what the MiG-21 can do, warning that if this situation escalates to actual combat maneuvering, the Chinese pilot has full confidence in his ability to outfly Smith, to get behind the F-104 and achieve a firing solution. Smith sees the weapons mounted under the MiG's wings with disturbing clarity now that the aircraft is directly in front of him. 2 K-1 air-to-air missiles, known to NATO as the AA-2 Atoll, hang from underwing pylons. These are infrared homing missiles, heat seekers that lock onto the exhaust signature of their targets. Based closely on the design of the American AIM-9 Sidewinder that the Soviets reverse-engineered after obtaining an example that failed to explode after being fired at a Chinese aircraft over the Taiwan Strait in 1958. The missiles have a range of about 3 miles and a top speed of Mach 2.5, fast enough to catch any aircraft currently flying.
Oh.
The MiG-21 also carries a twin-barrel 23mm cannon in an external pod mounted on the centerline, capable of firing 1,600 rounds per minute, each projectile large enough to cause catastrophic damage to an aircraft structure. The second MiG-21 moves into position on Smith's right side, executing the maneuver with smooth precision, boxing him in between the two Chinese fighters. Smith is now flying in a formation he never chose, never wanted, flanked by hostile aircraft whose pilots have made their intentions unmistakably clear. The second pilot is equally skilled, maintaining perfect position despite the difficulty of flying formation at these speeds and altitudes, where even slight variations in throttle setting or angle of attack can cause dangerous closure rates or separation. The tactical situation has degraded significantly. Either MiG pilot decides to fire, Smith has limited options. The F-104's radar warning receiver would give him perhaps warning if one of the MiGs achieved a radar lock and prepared to fire a missile. It's not enough time to initiate defensive maneuvers, to throw the Starfighter into a hard brake turn and deploy chaff if he had any, to try to break the missile's lock or cause it to lose track. But at these speeds and altitudes, with limited maneuvering energy and the MiGs positioned so advantageously, his chances of successfully defeating a missile attack are far from certain. The Maddox continues transmitting updates, the radio operator's voice now tight with stress as the implications of what's happening become clear to everyone. Monitoring this situation, Sword 7, be advised we have you visual with 2 confirmed hostile aircraft in close formation. We have notified the Battle Group Commander and Pacific Fleet Headquarters. USS Independence is launching additional fighters. Estimated time to your position, 20 minutes. Advised. Surface-to-air missile sites on Hainan have gone active. Multiple tracking radars now illuminating you. Recommend immediate withdrawal to the east at maximum speed. 20 minutes until American fighters from the carrier could arrive to provide support. It's an eternity in the current situation. Smith makes his decision, knowing that it's imperfect. There are no good options when you're alone at 45,000 feet with hostile. fighters on your wings and surface-to-air missiles warming up their guidance systems. He banks the F-104 gently to the southeast, away from both the MiGs and Chinese territory, while beginning a shallow descent, the movement deliberate and unthreatening, a clear signal of his intention to disengage without complying with the Chinese demand to land. He's not running exactly, but he's not staying to continue this confrontation either. He's taking the middle path, demonstrating that while he won't be intimidated or coerced, he's also not looking for a fight, that American policy favors de-escalation when possible, while never surrendering legitimate rights or yielding to illegal demands. The electronic surveillance pod continues its work throughout all of this, recording everything. The radar signatures of the MiG-21s, allowing analysts to determine their exact radar type and its performance characteristics, their flight characteristics and capabilities, providing hard data on turn rates, acceleration, climb performance, their positioning tactics, and intercept procedures, revealing Chinese doctrine and training standards. This data alone, if Smith can get it back to base, will justify the entire mission, providing invaluable intelligence that could shape American tactical development and operational planning for years to come. The lead MiG-21 pilot evidently doesn't like Smith's decision to turn away but not comply. The Chinese fighter breaks away sharply, pulling up and to the left in a hard climbing turn, G-forces compressing the pilot into his seat as the MiG's airframe groans under the stress. The aircraft climbs rapidly to 47,000 feet, 2,000 feet above Smith's current altitude, then rolls inverted and enters a steep dive directly toward the F-104 in what's unmistakably a mock attack run, a simulated gun attack or missile launch designed to demonstrate the MiG's ability to achieve a firing solution. Smith watches the MiG grow rapidly in his mirrors, the silver aircraft diving through his altitude barely 500 feet away, so close that he can see the pilot's hands on the controls, can see the sun glinting off the canopy, can count the individual panels on the aircraft's fuselage. Then the MiG pulls up sharply, just behind and below the F-104, the pilot pulling what must be 6 or 7 Gs to avoid overshooting, the airframe flexing visibly under the strain before climbing back up to Smith's altitude. It's a dangerous game, aggressive aircraft handling that pushes the limits of safety. One wrong move from a mid-air collision that would kill both pilots and likely trigger an international crisis, but it's also a clear message. We can kill you whenever we choose. We're letting you go, not because we can't stop you, but because we're choosing not to escalate this further. Remember that. The radio erupts with frantic transmissions, multiple voices competing for airspace on the tactical frequency. The Maddox reports that Chinese surface-to-air missile sites on Hainan have gone fully active, their Fansong fire control radars tracking Smith's aircraft with the precision necessary to guide SA to guideline missiles to their targets. These are the same missiles that shot down Francis Gary Powers in his U-2 over the Soviet Union in 1960, that have been causing problems for American aircraft over North Vietnam. Large two-stage weapons capable of reaching altitudes exceeding 80,000 feet and speeds of Mach 3.5. If the Chinese decide to fire, Smith will have perhaps 30 seconds from launch to impact. Enough time to see the missile's smoke trail rising from the ground to initiate defensive maneuvers, but not enough time to guarantee survival. American fighters from the carrier USS Independence, positioned 200 miles to the east in the Philippine Sea, are being scrambled. Pilots running to their F-4 Phantoms, engines spooling up, catapult crews preparing for emergency launches, but they won't arrive in time to affect the current situation, won't be able to intervene if the Chinese decide to turn this confrontation deadly. Smith continues his turn, now heading directly east, away from Chinese territory at maximum continuous power. The throttle pushed as far forward as it will go without engaging the afterburner. The F-104 accelerates through Mach 1.9, approaching Mach 2.0. The airframe shuddering slightly as it approaches the edges of its design envelope. Thin wings flexing under aerodynamic loads, they weren't really designed to sustain for extended periods. The indicated airspeed needle climbs past the red line marking, entering territory where structural failure becomes a real possibility, where metal fatigue and heat stress could cause catastrophic damage. The external skin temperature on the nose and leading edges is approaching 400 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to burn exposed skin. The friction of supersonic flight, converting kinetic energy into heat that the airframe must somehow dissipate or absorb. The two MiG-21s follow effortlessly, matching his speed with apparent ease. It's demonstrating that they can stay with him even at these extreme velocities. Even at this altitude where the air is so thin that aerodynamic controls become mushy and engine performance degrades due to oxygen starvation. This is perhaps the most troubling aspect of the entire encounter from a tactical and strategic perspective. The MiG-21 not only can reach these altitudes and speeds but can sustain them, can maneuver effectively, can maintain formation, and presumably achieve weapon solutions against even the fastest American reconnaissance aircraft. The F-104's speed advantage, one of its primary survival characteristics, one of the key factors that made it seem viable for these higher-risk missions, has been completely negated. For 5 agonizing minutes that feel like hours, 3 aircraft race eastward across the South China Sea, their contrails creating parallel white lines across the sky. Visible from ships dozens of miles away, it's the sound of their engines creating sonic booms that roll across the water like thunder. Smooth keeps one eye on his fuel gauge, watching the needle drop steadily, the digital counter clicking downward with alarming speed. The F-104's fuel consumption at these speeds is prodigious, measured in pounds per minute rather than the gallons per hour that civilian pilots think about, burning through his remaining fuel reserves at a rate that leaves him perhaps 15 minutes of flight time at this power setting before he'll be forced to reduce speed or face flame out. The MiG-21s maintain formation on either side, their pilots clearly comfortable at these speeds and altitudes, neither closing aggressively nor falling back, simply matching Smith's every move, demonstrating their presence, making it clear that they could pursue him indefinitely if they chose to, that he's not escaping so much as being allowed to leave. Then, as abruptly as they appeared from Hainan Island 40 minutes ago, the Chinese fighters break away in a maneuver that's almost choreographed in its precision. The lead pilot makes one final transmission, his English heavily accented but perfectly understandable. Carrying a tone of professional warning rather than personal animosity, "American spy pilot, you are lucky today. Your violation of Chinese sovereign airspace will be reported to your government through proper diplomatic channels. Next time we will not be so generous. We will not provide warning. Recommend you inform your commanders that the days when American aircraft could operate with impunity near Chinese territory are finished. Your technological advantages are disappearing. Remember this encounter and take appropriate caution in your future missions." The 2 MiG-21s execute tight turns in perfect synchronization, their pilots clearly comfortable with high-G maneuvering, the silver aircraft banking sharply to the west and descending. Heading back toward Hainan Island at a more economical cruise speed, their mission accomplished. They've intercepted an American reconnaissance aircraft, demonstrated their capabilities, made their government's position clear, gathered their own intelligence on American procedures and equipment, and disengaged without triggering an escalation that neither government actually wants. From their perspective, it's been a successful mission, a textbook interception that achieved all objectives while maintaining professional standards and avoiding unnecessary risk. Smith maintains his heading eastward until the Maddox confirms via radar that the Chinese fighters have landed at Lingshui Airfield on Hainan, the same base they scrambled from. Only then does he begin to relax, his hands slowly unclenching from the control stick, his shoulders dropping from the hunched position he's maintained throughout the encounter, blood flow returning to muscles that have been tensed for too long. He's safe now, or as safe as anyone ever is, flying a single-engine fighter over the ocean, beyond the range of Chinese missiles and interceptors, heading toward friendly territory and the carrier battle group that can provide protection. But his mind is racing, unable to shut down the adrenaline-fueled hyper-awareness that has kept him alive through the past 30 minutes. Processing and reprocessing everything that happened, every decision he made, every option he considered. Already thinking ahead to the debrief that will inevitably follow. The flight back to Okinawa takes 90 minutes. Every one of them giving Smith time to process the encounter, to replay every moment in his mind, to second-guess decisions, to wonder if he could have gathered more intelligence or handled the situation differently. He reduces power to economical cruise settings, nursing his remaining fuel, checking and rechecking his navigation to ensure he's on the most direct route to Kadena Airbase. The Pacific stretches endlessly below, the sun climbing higher in the sky, the water changing from deep blue to lighter shades as he passes over shallower areas. His radio maintains contact with the Maddox and with the carrier battle group reporting his position every 10 minutes, receiving updates on Chinese air activity, which has returned to normal patterns now that the excitement has ended. As he approaches Okinawa, the island rising from the sea like a green jewel, Smith goes through his landing checklist with extra care. His mind still not fully focused on the routine procedures after the intense concentration of the past 2 hours. The Kadena Tower clears him for a straightened approach to runway 05, the active runway based on current winds. He configures the F-104 for landing, lowering the landing gear with a satisfying thunk as the wheels lock into position, extending the flaps to their landing setting, reducing speed to approach velocity. The narrow runway rushes up to meet him, the F-104 touching down with typical precision, tires chirping as they make contact with concrete. The drag chute deploying automatically to help slow the aircraft from nearly 200 miles per hour to taxiing speed. Ground crews swarm the F-104 as soon as Smith shuts down the engine on the parking ramp, technicians immediately beginning their post-flight inspection, looking for any damage, any anomalies, any problems that need addressing before the aircraft can fly again. But before they can even open the access panels or check fluid levels, intelligence officers surround Smith, hustling him directly from the cockpit to a waiting staff car, then to a secure debriefing facility in one of Kadena's hardened buildings designed to withstand anything short of a direct nuclear hit. The building's windowless concrete walls, multiple security checkpoints, and complete electromagnetic shielding ensure that whatever happens inside remains completely secret, protected from both electronic eavesdropping and human intelligence gathering. The debriefing lasts 6 hours, conducted by a rotating team of specialists who bring different areas of expertise to bear on Smith's experience. Aircraft recognition specialists ask detailed questions about the MiG-21's physical characteristics, requesting descriptions of every panel line, every antenna, every external detail that might reveal information about production variants or equipment modifications. Weapons analysts want to know everything about the missiles and gun pod, their mounting systems, their apparent condition, anything that might indicate their operational status or technical specifications. Tactical analysts probe Smith's observations about pilot behavior, flying skills, communication procedures, trying to assess Chinese training standards and operational doctrine. Electronic warfare specialists pore over the data from the surveillance pod, correlating what Smith saw and heard with what the equipment recorded, building a comprehensive picture of Chinese radar systems, radio protocols, and electronic order of battle. Smith describes every detail of the encounter, discovering in the process that he observed and retained far more information than he consciously realized at the time. The human brain, when flooded with adrenaline and focused on survival, records enormous amounts of sensory data, creating memories with extraordinary detail that can be accessed later through careful questioning. He remembers the exact position of control surfaces on the MiG-21s, the slight wobble in one aircraft's flight path that might indicate a minor control system problem or pilot inexperience, the specific wording of radio transmissions, the tone and accent of the Chinese pilots' voices. Intelligence officers take copious notes on everything. Some details immediately flagged as particularly significant, others filed away for later correlation with information from other sources. The electronic surveillance pod data is immediately classified at the highest levels and packaged for courier transport to the National Security Agency headquarters at Fort Meade, Maryland, where specialists in Soviet and Chinese electronics will spend weeks analyzing every signal, every waveform, every frequency, building profiles of Chinese radar systems that will inform American electronic countermeasure development for years to come. The pod recorded radar signatures of the MiG-21 spin scan radar system, providing the first hard data on its operating frequencies and scan patterns, information that will allow American defensive systems to recognize this radar type instantly and deploy appropriate countermeasures. It also captured the fire control radars associated with SA-2 missile sites, confirming that China has received not just the missiles themselves, but also the sophisticated radar and guidance systems necessary to employ them effectively. Within 24 hours of Smith's landing at Kadena, his encounter with the MiG-21s reaches the highest levels of the United States government, triggering urgent meetings and policy reviews that ripple through the Pentagon, the State Department, and the intelligence community. The Defense Intelligence Agency produces an emergency assessment, working through the night to compile all available information about Chinese acquisition of Soviet aircraft. The report, stamped with classification markings that restrict its distribution to only the most senior officials, concludes that China has received a significant number of MiG-21 fighters from the Soviet Union, representing a major qualitative upgrade to their air defense capabilities that fundamentally alters the strategic balance in East Asia. The presence of these aircraft at Hainan Island, positioned in the heart of the South China Sea, astride major shipping lanes, and within range of key American facilities in the Philippines, demonstrates Chinese intention to control access to their coastline and project power across a vast area of international waters. The implications cascade through every level of military planning. Reconnaissance mission profiles are immediately revised by Pacific Air Force's headquarters, with new restrictions implemented before Smith even completes his debriefing. Flights along the Chinese coast must now maintain greater distances from territorial waters, pushed from the previous 15-mile standard to a new minimum of 25 miles, sacrificing some intelligence collection capability for increased safety margins. Altitude requirements are increased from 45,000 feet to 55,000 feet whenever possible. Though this pushes some aircraft types to the edge of their performance envelopes, aircraft are directed to operate at maximum cruise speed when within 200 miles of Chinese territory, maintaining energy states that allow immediate acceleration to maximum velocity if intercepted. The F-104 Starfighter, once considered essentially untouchable at high altitude due to its speed and sealing capabilities, is now recognized as vulnerable to the MiG-21's performance. Its primary survival advantage negated by an adversary with comparable or superior capabilities. But Smith's encounter reveals implications far more troubling than simply the presence of new aircraft in the Chinese inventory. Intelligence analysts studying the surveillance pod data, correlating it with Smith's detailed observations, conclude that the Chinese pilots demonstrated sophisticated training and tactical proficiency that indicates extensive Soviet support. They didn't simply scramble randomly in response to radar detection. They executed a coordinated interception using ground-controlled approach techniques that require integration between radar sites, command centers, and fighter aircraft. The precision of their intercept geometry, arriving at exactly the right position to achieve tactical advantage, suggests access to real-time radar tracking data and professional controllers guiding them onto target. The mock attack run demonstrated confidence and skill, aggressive but controlled maneuvering that shows pilots comfortable with their aircraft's capabilities and willing to push close to the edge without crossing into actual hostilities. Further investigation by the Central Intelligence Agency, drawing on human intelligence sources within the Chinese government and military, reveals a broader picture of Sino-Soviet military cooperation that has escaped American attention despite intensive intelligence collection efforts. The Soviet Union has been providing extensive training support to the People's Liberation Army Air Force for at least 18 months. The Soviet instructors operating from bases inside China, teaching Chinese pilots to operate the MiG-21 and developing integrated air defense doctrine that mirrors Soviet practices. Training facilities at bases near Beijing and Shanghai have been handling dozens of Chinese pilots, running them through progressively more complex flight training that culminates in tactical intercept scenarios against simulated American reconnaissance aircraft. The relationship between Moscow and Beijing, already strained by ideological differences that have American analysts predicting an eventual complete split, remains strong enough in military matters to support significant cooperation, technology transfer, and doctrinal development. The geopolitical implications ripple outward through American strategic planning, like waves spreading from a stone dropped into still water. Military planners throughout the Pacific Theater realize that reconnaissance operations across all of Asia face new risks that require fundamental recalculation of operational procedures and acceptable risk levels. The MiG-21's performance means that even high-flying U-2 spy planes might be vulnerable in certain scenarios, particularly if caught at lower altitudes during climb-out or descent, or if Chinese acquisition of surface-to-air missiles with higher ceilings continues to advance. The U-2, designed in the 1950s to operate at altitudes beyond the reach of Soviet interceptors and missiles, achieved global fame when Francis Gary Powers was shot down over the Soviet Union in 1960, demonstrating that technological advantage is always temporary, always subject to erosion as adversaries develop countermeasures and new capabilities. Navy carrier operations near the Chinese coast require immediate recalculation of risk zones and defensive procedures. Accounting for the extended reach of interceptors that can operate hundreds of miles from their bases, that can maintain combat effectiveness at extreme altitudes, that can achieve speeds sufficient to intercept even the fastest strike aircraft, carrier air wings. Previously confident in their ability to operate with relative impunity outside the range of Chinese coastal defenses, now must account for threats that can reach much farther, that can engage at much higher altitudes, that represent capabilities comparable to the best American fighters. Strike planning for potential conflict scenarios must incorporate much more robust defensive counter-air components, allocating more fighters to escort and protection roles, reducing the number available for strike missions against ground targets. In the months following Smith's encounter, American intelligence assets focus intensely on Chinese air bases near the coast, redirecting satellite coverage, increasing signals intelligence collection, tasking human intelligence sources to provide information about aircraft deliveries, pilot training, and operational capabilities. Satellite imagery from the KH-4 Corona reconnaissance satellites, photography taken from orbit, and recovered via film canisters that re-enter the atmosphere and are snagged in mid-air by specially equipped C-130 aircraft, confirms the presence of at least 2 full squadrons of MiG-21s at Hainan. Perhaps 24 aircraft in total based on typical Soviet squadron organization. Additional aircraft appear at bases near Shanghai and Guangzhou, suggesting a total inventory that could reach 6,280 MiG-21s, a substantial force that represents a significant percentage of China's total fighter strength. Signals intelligence intercepts, the product of listening stations scattered across Asia and on ships positioned in international waters, reveal extensive training programs with Chinese pilots flying multiple sorties daily to build proficiency on the new fighters. Practicing intercept procedures, conducting simulated combat engagements, developing the muscle memory and tactical intuition necessary for effective combat operations. The incident also affects American aircraft development programs and procurement decisions in ways that will shape military aviation for the next decade. The F-104, designed in the early 1950s as a pure interceptor, optimized for speed and rate of climb, is already being phased out of frontline Air Force service by 1965, replaced by more versatile fighters like the F-4 Phantom that can perform multiple roles effectively. The Phantom, designed originally as a Navy fleet defense fighter, carries sophisticated radar systems, advanced air-to-air missiles, and enough internal fuel to provide genuine combat radius without requiring extensive aerial refueling support. But Smith's encounter underscores the continuing importance of specific capabilities that some newer designs lack. Long-range detection systems that can identify threats before they achieve firing solutions. Electronic warfare capabilities that can detect, analyze, and counter enemy radar systems. Defensive systems that provide warning and protection against missile attacks. Smith himself continues flying reconnaissance missions, but never again encounters Chinese MiG-21s so closely. He completes his tour in the Pacific and returns to the United States, where he's assigned to a training squadron. He rarely discusses his encounter over the South China Sea. Bound by classification restrictions that remain in effect for decades, the MiG-21 becomes a fixture in Asian skies throughout the 1960s and 1970s. North. Vietnamese pilots fly them against American aircraft during the Vietnam War, achieving surprising success against larger, more powerful American fighters in certain scenarios. Chinese MiG-21s continued to patrol the South China Sea, occasionally intercepting American reconnaissance aircraft, but never again approaching as closely as they did on that September morning in 1965. Years later, after the end of the Cold War and the declassification of many intelligence documents, the full story of Smith's encounter emerges. Historians recognize it as a pivotal moment in the technological competition between East and West, a stark demonstration that American technological superiority could not be taken for granted. The incident influenced defense policy, aircraft procurement, and operational planning in ways that echoed through the remaining decades of the Cold War. The relationship between the United States and China has evolved dramatically since 1965, moving through periods of confrontation, détente, and complex interdependence. But in the skies over the South China Sea, military aircraft still encounter each other regularly, their crews navigating the same tensions and risks that Philip Smith faced that September morning. The technology has advanced enormously. Modern fighters are marvels compared to the F-104 and MiG-21. But the fundamental dynamics of power projection, territorial claims, and strategic competition remain remarkably similar. For Smith, now retired and living in Arizona, the memory of those MiG-21s climbing through 40,000 feet remains vivid. He describes it as the moment when the abstract threats discussed in intelligence briefings became immediate and real, when the Cold War stopped being a distant conflict and became personal. The Silver Fighters with their red star markings represented not just a technological challenge, but a human one. Highly trained pilots willing to risk their lives in defense of their nation's interests, just as he was willing to risk his. The electronic surveillance data from Smith's mission, carefully analyzed and cross-referenced with other intelligence sources, helped American planners understand not just what aircraft the Chinese possessed, but how they intended to use them. The tactics observed during the interception, the coordinated approach, the aggressive but controlled maneuvering, the clear radio communications, all painted a picture of a professional Air Force rapidly modernizing and adopting Soviet doctrine. This intelligence proved invaluable during the escalation of American involvement in Vietnam. Understanding that China possessed supersonic interceptors capable of reaching altitudes previously considered safe influenced decisions about reconnaissance routes, bombing campaigns, and emergency procedures for aircraft in distress. Pilots flying missions near the Chinese border knew that straying too far north could bring them into contact with MiG-21s, not the older, slower aircraft they might have expected. The incident also revealed the extent of Soviet military aid to China, coming at a time when American policymakers were trying to understand the dynamics of the Sino-Soviet relationship. That Moscow would provide its most advanced fighter aircraft too. Beijing suggested a level of cooperation that complicated American strategic planning. It would be years before the split between the Soviet Union and China widened into open hostility, forcing both Washington and Moscow to recalculate their approaches to Asian security. In the decades since, the F-104 Starfighter and the MiG-21 have both passed into history, placed by successive generations of increasingly sophisticated aircraft. But their encounter over the South China Sea in 1965 remains a textbook example of how technological intelligence is gathered in real-world conditions. How split-second decisions by individual pilots can have strategic implications, and how the Cold War was fought not just through diplomacy and proxy conflicts, but through daily tests of will and capability in contested airspace around the world. Captain Philip Smith's flight that September morning lasted less than 3 hours from takeoff to landing. But its impact resonated for decades. It stands as a reminder that history's pivotal moments often occur not in conference rooms or battlefields, but in the routine execution of dangerous missions by dedicated professionals. And that the true story of the Cold War includes thousands of such moments, most of them still classified, when men and women on both sides of the conflict demonstrated courage, skill, and professionalism in the service of their nations.